All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to put aside the spreadsheets, the market projections, all the usual stuff. We're going to talk about something way more fundamental, something literally under our feet, the planet. We're going to explore why a simple map might just be the most powerful strategic tool you have. So let's unfold the atlas and see what it has to teach us. You know, in the business world, we love talking about a flat world. We love the idea of the cloud making distance meaningless. But let's be honest, if the last few years have taught us anything, it's that this quote is painfully true. All it takes is one ship getting stuck in a canal or one port shutting down, and suddenly our seamless digital world grinds to a screeching halt. Physical reality always gets the last laugh. And you can really see that clash right here. On the left, that's the story we've been telling ourselves for the last 20, 30 years. This myth of a borderless, frictionless global economy. But look at the right. That's not history. That's yesterday's news. Supply chains snapping, countries scrambling for resources. This is geography making a massive comeback. So, this brings us to our first big idea. We need to puncture this myth of a flat world and really understand why the map, this ancient tool, is actually more critical for strategy today than ever before. And our guide for this journey is Robert D. Kaplan's fantastic book, The Revenge of Geography. Now, Kaplan is a seasoned geopolitical analyst, and he basically wrote this book as a massive wake-up call. His core idea? It's simple, but it's so powerful. Geography is the fundamental reality. It's the base layer, the operating system on which all human history and all business strategy is built. So this is the book's central challenge, and I'm going to pose it directly to you. Take a hard look at your own company's 10-year plan. Does it assume that goods, people, and data will just flow freely forever? Or is it built for the world as it actually is? A world full of mountains, oceans, choke points, and borders. It's a huge question. Okay, so let's start decoding Kaplan's map. To really get what he's saying, you have to understand three core concepts, three pillars of how to read the world geographically. Let's start with the first one. First up is what's called the Heartland Theory. The basic idea is that this massive interior of Eurasia is the strategic pivot of the entire globe. If you control this area, you can project power across the whole world island. That's Eurasia and Africa combined. Think this is some dusty old theory? Just look at China's Belt and Road Initiative. That is a textbook modern-day heartland strategy. It's about connecting this resource-rich interior to the world's oceans, totally rewriting the rules of global trade. Now, if the heartland is the pivot, the coastal fringes, what we call the rimlands, that's where all the action happens. It's where the ports are, where the cities are, where the money is. But Kaplan also has another name for them. Shatterzones. Why? Because this is where the ambitions of sea powers and land powers have always collided. Think about the South China Sea today. It's one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, but it's also a major military flashpoint. For any business, these are your high-growth markets, but they are also, without a doubt, your highest risk zones. And finally, there's the crucial difference between natural and artificial borders. See, natural borders, think mountain ranges, big rivers, deserts, they tend to create stable countries. But artificial borders, the straight lines drawn on a map, often by colonial powers who didn't care about the people living there, they almost always bake instability and conflict right into the system. The big takeaway here is that country risk isn't just a political idea, it's a deeply physical one. Okay, time to put my professor hat on for a second. Kaplan's framework is brilliant, it really is, but it's not without its critics, and it's important to understand the limits of this way of thinking. Let's look at where the theory really holds up and where it starts to bend. The book's number one strength, hands down, is that it injects a much-needed dose of realism back into our strategic conversations. We live in an age that celebrates the visionary CEO, the disruptor who can change the world. And Kaplan just gently reminds us, hey, even the most brilliant leader is ultimately constrained by the hard realities of the physical world. Things like resource scarcity aren't just quaint problems from the past, they are enduring truths. But, and this is a big but, the main critique is that this kind of thinking can lead to what we call geographic determinism. The idea that geography is destiny. And that's dangerous because it downplays things like innovation, good governance, and sheer human will. I mean, look at the classic counterexample, Singapore, a tiny resource-poor island that through just brilliant strategy and rock-solid institutions turned itself into a global economic powerhouse. Geography gave it a location, but human agency built the miracle. Plus, we can't ignore how the digital world does change the game in some ways. All right, enough theory. This is where it gets really interesting. Let's see how this plays out in the real corporate world. We're going to look at two big case studies, one company that mastered the map and another that got completely crushed by it. So first up, our success story, the Danish shipping giant Maersk. These guys are the perfect example of a company that thinks like a geopolitical strategist. They don't just see markets, they see the physical geography of flow. So what did Maersk do that was so smart? Well, while all their competitors were getting obsessed with being asset-light, Maersk looked at the map. They saw the growing instability in those rimlands, and they did the exact opposite. They doubled down on hard physical assets. They started buying up port terminals, rail lines. They focused on controlling the physical choke points of global trade. They understood that in a bumpy world, the company that owns the physical pathway has the ultimate advantage. And now for our cautionary tale. Back in 2013, the huge American retailer Target decided to expand into Canada. On paper, it looked like a no-brainer. Same language, similar culture, what could go wrong? Well, Target made a classic fatal mistake. They saw a market, but they completely failed to see the territory. And that right there was the price tag for ignoring the map. $2 billion. Just gone. How on earth does a mistake that big even happen? Let's break it down. The problem was 100% logistics, pure and simple geography. Canada is an enormous country, but almost all its people live in a long, thin ribbon right along the US border. Target tried to just copy and paste its super efficient, dense US supply chain model onto this totally different geographic reality. It was a complete disaster. Trucks were driving for 8-9 hours between major cities. The weather was wreaking havoc. The result? Empty shelves, angry customers, and a complete withdrawal from the country in less than 2 years. They showed zero respect for the map, and the map had its revenge. Okay, so the big question is, how do you avoid making a $2 billion geography mistake? I want to give you a really simple, practical toolkit for how to start thinking like a geostrategist. Okay, 3 things. First, do a geospatial audit. I mean, literally get a map and trace your entire supply chain. Does it run right through a potential Shatterzone? You need to know that. Second, stop hiring generic global executives. You need real regional specialists, people with dirt under their fingernails knowledge of the physical and cultural terrain. And third, start using geography to evaluate long-term risk, especially with climate change. Are any of your key facilities located in places that might be underwater in 20 years? These are geographic questions. And that brings us to our final wrap-up here. If you take one thing away from Kaplan's work, it's this. The map isn't just a tool for navigation. It's a mentor. It's a guide for our incredibly complex present and our very uncertain future. And I think this quote just says it all. At the end of the day, we have to balance all of our exciting digital ambitions with a deep sense of physical humility. Because whether we realize it or not, every major strategic decision we make, where we build our factories, where we target our customers, who we choose as partners, it's all a bet on geography. Which leads me to this final question for you to chew on. In this new age of AI, of remote work, of the metaverse, is the physical map, this bumpy, jagged, inconveniently real world, actually becoming more important to strategy, not less? Something to think about. Don't just look at the dashboard, look at the map.